The rain fell in sheets, turning the empty streets of downtown into rivers of darkness. It was 3:17 in the morning when Dante Romano's black Mercedes turned onto Fifth Avenue, the only sound besides the storm being the low purr of the engine and the rhythmic swipe of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Dante sat in the back seat, his tailored charcoal suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour, his dark eyes scanning the streets with the practiced vigilance of a man who had survived 38 years in a world where letting your guard down for even a moment could mean death. His driver, Marco, a loyal soldier who had been with him for 15 years, navigated the slick roads with careful precision. They were returning from a meeting that had run longer than expected, a territorial dispute with the Volkov family, the Russian syndicate that had been encroaching on Romano territory for the past 6 months. The meeting had been tense, negotiations delicate, but Dante had secured what he wanted. He always did. In his world, you were either predator or prey, and Dante Romano had never been prey. As they passed beneath a flickering streetlight, something caught his attention. A figure huddled against the brick wall of a closed flower shop, barely visible through the torrential rain. At first he thought it might be a homeless person seeking shelter. Nothing unusual in this part of the city at this hour. But something made him look again. It was a woman. Young. He could tell even from this distance. She was curled into herself, knees drawn to her chest, face buried in her arms. Her long dark hair was plastered to her head and shoulders, her clothes soaked through. But what struck him, what made him lean forward in his seat for a closer look, was the way her shoulders shook. She was crying. Not just crying. Sobbing with the kind of despair that came from somewhere deep and broken. "Stop the car," Dante heard himself say. The words surprised him even as they left his mouth. Marco's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, questioning. "Boss, we should get you home. It's late, and this neighborhood is not exactly safe at this hour." "I said stop the car," Dante repeated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made men twice his size obey without question. The Mercedes pulled to the curb. Dante opened the door before Marco could come around to do it for him, stepping out into the rain. The cold water immediately began soaking through his expensive suit, but he barely noticed. He approached the woman slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. In his line of work, sudden movements could get you killed, and he had no intention of frightening her more than she clearly already was. As he got closer, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, mid-20s at most, with delicate features that were currently contorted in anguish. Her dress, what had probably been a pretty blue sundress hours ago, now clung to her thin frame, torn at the shoulder. Bruises were beginning to form on her upper arms, finger-shaped marks that made Dante's jaw tighten. He crouched down a few feet away from her, getting to her level. The rain continued to pour, running down his face, dripping from his hair. "Miss," he said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "You need to get out of this rain. You're going to freeze." She didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that she'd heard him. Just continued crying, her body trembling from cold, fear, or both. Dante looked back at Marco, who stood by the car, hand inside his jacket where he kept his weapon, scanning the surrounding area for threats. The boss turned back to the woman, this time moving slightly closer. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He'd spent the better part of 2 decades instilling fear in people. Offering comfort was not in his usual repertoire. "But my car is warm and dry. Let me take you somewhere safe." Finally, she lifted her head. Her eyes, a striking green even in the dim light and swollen from crying, met his. There was terror in those eyes, but also something else. A desperate, fragile hope that broke something in Dante's chest that he hadn't known could still break. "There is no safe," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Not for me. Not anymore." The words were so quiet, he almost didn't hear them over the rain, but he did hear them. And something in the way she said them, the absolute defeat and resignation, stirred a protective instinct he thought he'd buried years ago, along with his capacity for caring about anyone outside his immediate family. "What's your name?" he asked, extending his hand slowly. "I'm Dante." She stared at his hand as if it were an alien object. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer, wouldn't take the offered gesture. Then, so softly he had to lean in to hear, she said, "Elena. My name is Elena." "Elena," he repeated, the name feeling right somehow. "Will you let me help you? Just to get you out of this rain. That's all I'm asking right now." Her eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for danger. Whatever she saw there must have been enough, because she placed her small, freezing hand in his. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Not attraction exactly, though she was beautiful even in her current state, but something deeper, a connection he couldn't explain and didn't have time to analyze. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. She was taller than he'd thought, coming up to his shoulder, but so thin he could feel her bones through the wet fabric of her dress. When was the last time she'd eaten? How long had she been out here? Marco opened the back door as they approached, his expression carefully neutral, though Dante could see the questions in his eyes. The boss didn't make a habit of picking up strays, especially not in the middle of the night in one of the most dangerous parts of the city. Dante guided Elena into the warm interior of the car, then slid in beside her. She immediately began shivering more violently as the heat hit her cold skin, her teeth chattering audibly. He shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, but at least it was dry. "Where to, boss?" Marco asked from the driver's seat. Dante considered. He couldn't take her to one of his properties. He didn't know who she was running from, or what kind of trouble she was in. Taking her somewhere connected to him could put her in more danger. But he also couldn't just drop her at a hospital or shelter and walk away. Something told him that whatever she was running from, it was serious enough that conventional safe havens wouldn't protect her. "The penthouse," he finally said, making a decision he suspected he might regret, but couldn't seem to stop himself from making. "Take the back route." Marco nodded, understanding. The back route meant taking extra precautions, making sure they weren't followed. Whatever this was, Dante was treating it as a security concern, which meant he was already more invested than he should be. The drive to his penthouse took 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which Elena sat silent and shivering despite the jacket and the car's heating system. Dante didn't push her to talk. He'd learned long ago that silence often revealed more than words, and right now, her silence was screaming volumes. She was terrified. Not just scared, but bone-deep terrified in the way people got when they'd seen things they shouldn't have, new things that could get them killed. He recognized it because he'd seen it before, in witnesses who'd stumbled onto Romano business, in rivals who'd realized too late they'd made a fatal mistake. But there was something else too. Beneath the fear was a steely determination, a refusal to completely break that he found himself admiring. She'd been crying when he found her, yes, but she'd also gotten up when he offered his hand. She was still fighting, even if she didn't realize it yet. When they arrived at his building, a sleek high-rise in the financial district that housed some of the city's wealthiest residents, Marco pulled into the private underground garage. The penthouse had its own elevator, accessible only with a keycard and biometric scan. Security that had cost a small fortune, but was worth every penny. Dante guided Elena to the elevator, his hand on the small of her back. She moved like someone in a daze, putting one foot in front of the other mechanically. As the elevator began its smooth ascent to the top floor, he finally spoke again. "When we get upstairs, I'm going to have my housekeeper draw you a hot bath and find you some dry clothes. Then, if you're up for it, we can talk. If not, you can sleep. But you're safe here, Elena. I give you my word." She turned to look at him then, really look at him for the first time. He could see her taking in his expensive suit, now ruined by the rain, his confident stance, the barely concealed power in the way he carried himself. He watched as intelligence flickered in those green eyes, as she started putting pieces together. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really? You're not just some good Samaritan who stops to help crying girls in the rain." A slight smile tugged at his lips. "No, I'm not. But that doesn't change my offer. You need help. I'm offering it. What happens after that is up to you." The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. Elena stepped out, her eyes widening despite her obvious exhaustion. The space was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline, high-end modern furniture, and artwork that belonged in museums. "Mrs. Chen?" Dante called out, and moments later, a woman in her 60s appeared from one of the side rooms. She was small and efficient, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she'd been Dante's housekeeper for 10 years. Nothing surprised her anymore. She took one look at Elena's bedraggled state and immediately switched into caretaker mode. "Come with me, dear," she said, her voice warm and motherly. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes and into a hot bath." Elena looked back at Dante, uncertainty written across her face. He nodded encouragingly. "It's okay. Mrs. Chen will take good care of you." After they disappeared down the hallway, Dante stood alone in his living room, rainwater pooling at his feet on the hardwood floor. He ran a hand through his wet hair, asking himself what the hell he was doing. He had enough problems. The Volkov situation, the new shipment coming in next week, the federal investigation he knew was building, even though they thought they were being subtle about it. He didn't need this. Didn't need some mysterious woman with bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes, bringing whatever trouble she was running from to his doorstep. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to regret stopping the car. Something about her, about the way she'd looked at him with those desperate green eyes, had gotten under his skin in a way nothing had in years. He changed into dry clothes and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, settling into the leather chair by the window to wait. The city stretched out below him, his city in many ways. He'd built an empire here, brick by bloody brick, had earned the fear and respect that came with the Romano name, but empires were lonely places. He'd learned that lesson well over the years. 40 minutes later, Mrs. Chen emerged. "She's in the bath," the housekeeper reported quietly. "I found some of your sister's old clothes that should fit her. Poor thing is covered in bruises, Mr. Romano. Someone hurt her badly." Dante's jaw clenched. Did she say anything? About who did it or why? Mrs. Chen shook her head. Not a word. Just cried quietly the whole time I was helping her. Whatever happened, it's bad. She's scared out of her mind. After Mrs. Chen retired to her room, Dante waited another hour before Elena emerged. She was dressed in soft gray sweatpants and an oversized sweater that had belonged to his younger sister before she'd moved to Milan 3 years ago. Her dark hair was still damp, but combed back from her face, revealing delicate features that were striking now that they weren't contorted in anguish. She stood in the doorway of the living room, hesitant, as if waiting for permission to enter. "Come in, sit down," Dante said, gesturing to the couch across from his chair. "Would you like something to eat? To drink?" She shook her head, moving slowly to the couch and perching on its edge, as if ready to bolt at any moment. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stopping, for bringing me here, for the clothes and the bath. You didn't have to do any of that." "I know," he replied, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Want to tell me why you were sitting in the rain at 3:17 in the morning, crying like your world had ended?" Her hands twisted in her lap, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then haltingly, she began to speak. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. 3 hours ago, I was working late at the law firm where I'm a paralegal. Monroe and Associates downtown. Everyone else had gone home, but I was finishing up filing for a case going to trial next week. I heard voices from one of the senior partner's offices. Charles Monroe. I thought maybe he'd come back for something he'd forgotten." She paused, swallowing hard. The sound that came from her throat was almost a sob, but she held it back. "I was going to let him know I was still there. We're supposed to let the partners know if we're working late for security reasons. But when I got closer to his office, I heard something that made me stop." "What did you hear?" Dante prompted gently when she fell silent. A man's voice, not Mr. Monroe, saying something about a shipment, about making sure the product was distributed before the federal audit, about hiding the money trail. Elena's green eyes met his. "I'm not stupid, Mr. Romano. I know what I was hearing. I know what it meant." Dante's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. Monroe and Associates. He knew that firm. They handled legal work for several of the city's most powerful families, including some of his competitors. If Elena had stumbled onto evidence of money laundering or drug distribution, she was in serious danger. "What did you do?" he asked. "I should have just left. Should have pretended I never heard anything. But I didn't. I pulled out my phone and I started recording." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I thought I was being smart. Thought maybe I could take what I learned to the police, be a hero, do the right thing. But they heard you." She nodded, tears beginning to stream down her face again. The office door opened, and there were 3 of them. Mr. Monroe, and 2 men I'd never seen before. Big men with cold eyes. They saw my phone. They knew I'd been recording. What happened next? Dante kept his voice calm, but inside, anger was building. He could already picture the scene, could imagine what 3 grown men might do to a young woman who'd overheard something she shouldn't have. One of them grabbed me, took my phone and smashed it. They were arguing about what to do with me. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. One of them wanted to kill me right there, said it would be easiest, cleanest. But Mr. Monroe said that would bring too much attention. A body found in the law firm would mean investigations, questions they couldn't afford. So what did they decide? They were going to take me somewhere else, make it look like I'd left town voluntarily, or maybe like I'd had an accident. Elena's whole body was shaking now, but while they were arguing, while the one guy's grip loosened just a little, I ran, just bolted for the door. I didn't think, just ran, and they chased you. For a while, I could hear them behind me. I ran through the office, down the back stairs, out into the rain. I kept running until I couldn't run anymore, until I thought my lungs would burst. When I finally stopped and looked back, I didn't see them anymore. I thought maybe I'd lost them. She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of the borrowed sweater. But I knew they'd be looking for me. Knew I couldn't go home. Couldn't go to my apartment. So I just sat down against that wall and cried because I didn't know what else to do. Didn't know where to go or who to trust. Dante set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Elena, I need you to think very carefully. Did you recognize either of the other two men? Anything distinguishing about them? Accents? Tattoos? Anything at all? She closed her eyes, clearly trying to recall details through her terror. One of them had a scar, she said slowly, across his left cheek, and he called the other one Alexei. I remember because it struck me as unusual. Dante's blood ran cold. Alexei. Scarred face. That would be Alexei Volkov, nephew of Viktor Volkov, the head of the Russian syndicate. The same family Dante had just been negotiating with hours before Elena had overheard their operation. This wasn't just bad. This was catastrophic for Elena. The Volkovs didn't leave loose ends. If she could identify Alexei, if she could testify to what she'd heard, it would be enough to bring down their entire operation in the city. They would tear the city apart looking for her, and now she was sitting in his living room, wearing his sister's clothes, trusting him with her life, whether she fully realized it yet or not. Dante stood and walked to the window, his mind working through scenarios, calculating risks and potential outcomes. Behind him, he could hear Elena's quiet crying resuming. He turned back to face her, coming to a decision that he knew was going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet predict. Elena, look at me, he said firmly. When she raised her tear-stained face, he continued, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. The men you overheard, they're part of a very dangerous organization. The fact that you can identify one of them means they won't stop looking for you. Ever. Do you understand what I'm saying? She nodded slowly, fresh fear blooming in her eyes. So what am I supposed to do? I can't hide forever. I can't just disappear. That's exactly what you're going to do, he said. But not alone. I'm going to help you. Why? She asked. The question direct and challenging despite her fear. Why would you help me? You don't know me. And something tells me you're not exactly on the side of law and order yourself. He smiled slightly at that. No, I'm not. But I'm also not in the business of letting innocent people get killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Plus, there was something about the way she'd looked at him in the rain. Something that had stirred protective instincts he'd thought long dead. The sound of his phone ringing interrupted them. Dante glanced at the screen. Marco, he answered, stepping away from Elena. Boss. Marco's voice was tense. We've got a problem. I just got word from our contact at the precinct. There's been a missing person report filed. A young woman from a downtown law firm, Monroe and Associates. They're claiming she left work around midnight and never made it home. Her roommate filed the report an hour ago. Dante's eyes flicked to Elena. They're already covering their tracks, making it look like she simply vanished. There's more, Marco continued. The Volkovs have put out word on the street. They're looking for a girl, 5'6", dark hair, green eyes. They're offering $50,000 to anyone who can find her. Dante cursed under his breath. That kind of money would have every two-bit criminal in the city searching for Elena. Understood. Increase security at all our properties. And Marco, not a word about our guest to anyone. Not even the family. You got it, boss. The line went dead. Dante turned back to Elena, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and resignation. They're already looking for you, he said flatly. $50,000 bounty on your head. By tomorrow your face will be all over the criminal underground. Elena stood, wrapping her arms around herself. Maybe I should just go to the police. Tell them everything. Let them protect me. The police can't protect you from the Volkovs, Dante said sharply. Half the department is on their payroll. You'd be dead within 24 hours of walking into a station. So what then? Her voice rose, panic creeping in. I just hide here forever? Wait for them to eventually find me and kill me anyway? Dante crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her gently by the shoulders. Listen to me, Elena. I know you're scared. You have every right to be, but I didn't pull you off that street just to let them have you. You're under my protection now, and in this city that means something. I don't understand, she whispered. Why do you care? What am I to you? Right now, you're someone who needs help. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. He released her shoulders, stepping back. But tonight, you need to sleep. You're exhausted, and you've been through hell. We'll talk more in the morning and figure out a plan. Elena looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was clearly winning. Mrs. Chen prepared the guest room for you, Dante said, gesturing down the hallway. It's the second door on the left. The door locks from the inside if that makes you feel safer. She nodded slowly, turning toward the hallway. Then she paused, looking back at him. Mr. Romano? Just Dante. Dante. she corrected. Thank you. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You saved my life tonight. After she disappeared into the guest room, Dante returned to his chair and his scotch. What had he gotten himself into? Protecting Elena meant making an enemy of the Volkovs, possibly destroying the fragile peace they'd just negotiated. It meant putting his own organization at risk. But as he sat there, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness, he found he didn't regret his decision. There was something about her, a combination of vulnerability and strength that called to something deep inside him. Something he'd thought was dead. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. It's 3 a.m, Dante. This better be important. I need information on Monroe and Associates law firm, Dante said. Everything. Client list, financial records, any connection to the Volkovs. I need it by noon tomorrow. There was a pause on the other end. This related to the girl everyone's looking for? Maybe. Can you do it or not? I can do it. But Dante, if you're going up against the Volkovs over some random girl, it's going to be war. Then it's war, Dante replied, and ended the call. He spent the rest of the night at his desk, making calls, putting pieces in motion. By the time dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he had the beginnings of a plan. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it was the only way to keep Elena safe and deal with the Volkov problem permanently. Around 7, Mrs. Chen emerged from her room, raising her eyebrows at finding Dante still awake and working. Long night, sir? Long night, he agreed. When Elena wakes up, make her breakfast. Whatever she wants. And Mrs. Chen, keep her comfortable but inside. No one can know she's here. The housekeeper nodded, understanding immediately. Of course. She hesitated, then added, She seems like a sweet girl. Whatever trouble she's in, I hope you can help her. So do I, Dante murmured. So do I. Elena didn't emerge until nearly noon, looking rested but still wary. She'd changed back into the borrowed clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Mrs. Chen had made French toast and bacon, comfort food that Elena picked at without much appetite. Dante had showered and changed into fresh clothes, black slacks and a dark gray shirt, though he hadn't slept. He joined her at the dining table, a cup of coffee in hand. How did you sleep? He asked. Better than I expected, she admitted. Your guest room is nicer than my entire apartment. She paused, then asked, Have you heard anything? About the search for me? He debated how much to tell her, finally deciding on honesty. The Volkovs have increased the bounty to 75,000. Your face isn't on the news yet, but Monroe has reported you missing to the police. They're painting you as unstable, claiming you'd been acting strange lately, implying you might hurt yourself. Elena's fork clattered to her plate. That's insane. I've worked there for 3 years. Everyone knows I'm reliable and stable. They're controlling the narrative, Dante explained, making it so that if you do turn up dead, it looks like suicide rather than murder. It's standard practice for these situations. She pushed her plate away, clearly no longer able to eat. So what's your plan? You said last night we'd figure something out. Dante set down his coffee cup. There are 2 options. Option 1, I can create a new identity for you. New name, new papers, enough money to start over somewhere far from here. You disappear completely, and the Volkovs eventually give up the search and move on. And option 2, we go on the offensive. We gather evidence against Monroe and the Volkovs. Solid evidence that we can use to either take them down through legal channels or leverage to force them to leave you alone. Elena stared at him. That's insane. You're talking about going up against a major crime family and a corrupt law firm. That could get you killed too. Possibly, he agreed with a slight smile. But I've been in this business a long time, Elena. The Volkovs and I were going to come to blows eventually anyway. This just moves up the timeline. She shook her head in disbelief. I still don't understand why you're doing this. Why you're risking so much for me. Dante leaned back in his chair, considering his answer carefully. Maybe I'm tired of letting monsters win. Maybe I saw something in you last night that reminded me there are still things worth protecting in this world. Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't walk away from someone in trouble. Does it matter? I think it does, Elena said quietly, because I need to know if I can trust you. Really trust you. Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them. An understanding. A connection that went deeper than words. Before Dante could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His information broker. I need to take this, he said, standing. It might be important. He walked to his study, closing the door before answering. Talk to me. I've got what you asked for. The voice on the other end said, and it's worse than you thought. Monroe and Associates isn't just laundering money for the Volkovs. They're facilitating human trafficking. moving girls brought in from Eastern Europe through their legal channels. The whole operation is massive, Dante. We're talking millions of dollars. Dante's hand tightened on the phone. Send me everything you have. Encrypted. Already done. But Dante, there's something else. The girl, Elena Martinez. I looked into her background like you asked. She's clean. No criminal record. Good worker. By all accounts, exactly who she seems to be. But her father, he died 5 years ago in what was ruled a suicide. Jumped off a bridge downtown. And, Dante prompted, hearing the hesitation in the man's voice. And I found some irregularities in the case file. Witnesses who were never interviewed. Evidence that disappeared. Elena's father worked as an accountant. Guess who one of his clients was? Monroe and Associates. Bingo. I can't prove it. But my gut says her father found something he shouldn't have. Just like she did. History repeating itself. After he hung up, Dante sat in silence for a long moment. Elena's father had likely been murdered by the same people now hunting her. She was connected to this web deeper than either of them had realized. When he returned to the dining room, Elena was standing by the window, staring out at the city below. Without turning, she said, "My father killed himself 5 years ago. At least that's what they told me. But I never believed it. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't unstable. One day he was fine, and the next he was dead." She turned to face Dante, tears streaming down her face. He worked for Monroe and Associates too, not as a lawyer, as their accountant. And I just realized he probably found what I found, probably heard what I heard, and they killed him for it. Dante crossed to her, and this time when he pulled her into his arms, she didn't resist. She cried against his chest, 5 years of grief and confusion and anger pouring out. He held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort he didn't know he still remembered how to say. "We're going to make them pay," he said quietly. "For your father, for what they tried to do to you, for all of it. I promise you, Elena, they're going to pay." She pulled back to look up at him, her green eyes red from crying but blazing with determination. "I want to help. I want to be part of bringing them down. It's going to be dangerous. I don't care. They took my father from me. They tried to kill me. I want justice, Dante. Real justice." He studied her face, seeing the steel beneath the vulnerability. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this my way. You follow my lead. You do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Understood? Understood. If you've enjoyed this story so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next thrilling tale. Your support means everything to this channel. Now, let's continue with Elena and Dante's dangerous journey. Over the next week, Dante and Elena worked together to build their case against Monroe and the Volkovs. She spent hours going through financial records that Dante's people had obtained, using her paralegal training to identify patterns and connections. He was impressed by her sharp mind, the way she could see links others would miss. But it wasn't just her intelligence that impressed him. It was her courage, the way she refused to let fear paralyze her. She'd been through hell, had her life threatened, had learned her father was likely murdered, and yet she kept going, kept fighting. They fell into a routine. Mornings were spent reviewing documents and planning their next moves. Afternoons were dedicated to reaching out to Dante's contacts, building a network of information and support. Evenings, after Mrs. Chen had retired, they would sit in the living room and talk, not about the case, but about themselves, their lives, their pasts, the paths that had led them to that rainy street at 3:17 in the morning. Elena told him about growing up with a single father after her mother died when she was 8. About putting herself through college while working full-time, about her dreams of becoming a lawyer herself someday, of fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Dante found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. About his own father, killed in a gang war when Dante was 16, about the burden of taking over the family business before he was ready, about the loneliness of building an empire with no one to share it with. "I was engaged once," he told her one night, the word surprising even himself. Her name was Sophia. We were young, thought we had forever, but she couldn't handle my world, the danger, the violence, the constant threats. She left 6 months before the wedding. "Do you still love her?" Elena asked quietly. Dante considered the question. "No, I thought I did for a long time, but I think I was just in love with the idea of her, with the fantasy of a normal life. But this is who I am, Elena. This world, dark as it is, it's mine. I stopped pretending otherwise years ago." "Does it ever get lonely?" she asked. "Being at the top, being feared instead of loved?" "Every single day," he admitted. "But lonely is safe. Lonely means no one gets close enough to hurt you or betray you." Elena met his eyes. "Is that why you're helping me?" Because I'm temporary? Because eventually I'll disappear and you'll go back to your lonely but safe empire? The question caught him off guard, because he'd been asking himself the same thing. The truth was, somewhere over the past week, Elena had stopped being just someone he was protecting. She'd become someone he looked forward to seeing each morning. Someone whose smile made the penthouse feel less empty. Someone who made him remember what it was like to care about something more than power and territory. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe at first. But now, he paused, searching for the right words. Now I'm not so sure temporary is what I want. Before Elena could respond, his phone rang. Marco's name flashed on the screen. "Excuse me," Dante said, answering as he walked toward his study. "Boss, we have a problem." Marco's voice was tight. "Viktor Volkov just called. He wants a meeting. Tomorrow night. Says it's urgent." "Did he say what it's about?" "No, but my gut says it's about the girl. Word on the street is they know someone's protecting her, and they're trying to figure out who." Dante's jaw clenched. "Set it up. Neutral territory. Make sure our people are in position." "You sure about this, boss?" "Could be a trap." "Everything's a trap, Marco. The question is whether we're smart enough to turn it around on them." After hanging up, Dante returned to find Elena standing by the window again, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "That was about me, wasn't it?" she said. "About them knowing I'm somewhere safe. How did you?" he started. "I've learned to read you this week," she interrupted, turning to face him. "The way your jaw tightens when you're angry, how your voice drops an octave when you're planning something dangerous. So what happens now? Now I meet with Viktor Volkov and find out exactly what he knows. And if he knows about me, about us, then things are going to get complicated very quickly." Dante moved closer to her. "But Elena, no matter what happens at that meeting, I want you to know something. I'm not going to let them have you. Whatever it costs me, whatever I have to do, you're under my protection. That doesn't change." She reached up, her hand resting against his chest, over his heart. "You've become more than just my protector, Dante. You know that, right?" He covered her hand with his own, feeling his heart beat beneath their joined palms. "Yeah, I know." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings and possibilities. Dante found himself leaning closer, drawn to her in a way that had nothing to do with duty or protection. Elena tilted her face up, her lips parting slightly, her green eyes dark with something that looked a lot like desire. Just as their lips were about to meet, the moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass. Dante reacted instantly, pulling Elena down behind the couch as gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the window, shredding the expensive furniture and embedding themselves in walls. "Stay down," Dante commanded, drawing a weapon from beneath the coffee table. He'd always kept guns hidden throughout the penthouse, a precaution that was now saving their lives. The firing stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the ringing silence that followed, Dante heard the sound of running feet, people evacuating the building. This wasn't just a hit. This was a message. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know she's with you, Romano. Viktor wants his loose end tied up. You have 48 hours to hand her over or we start a war. Your choice." Dante showed the message to Elena, whose face had gone pale. "I need to leave," she said immediately. "I'll disappear on my own." "You've done enough. I won't let you start a war because of me." "It's not your choice," he said firmly. "And it's too late anyway. They already know you're with me. Giving you up now would show weakness. In my world, that's the same as signing my own death warrant. So what do? We do what we should have done from the start. We take the fight to them." Over the next 24 hours, Dante mobilized his entire organization. He called in every favor, activated every asset, prepared for the war he'd been trying to avoid. But more than that, he used the information Elena had helped him compile to create leverage. The evidence they'd gathered wasn't just about the Volkovs. It implicated city officials, police officers, judges, all the people who'd enabled Monroe and Associates to operate with impunity for years. Dante had it all copied and prepared for release to the media, to federal authorities, to anyone who could use it. It was his insurance policy. His guarantee that if the Volkovs made a move against him or Elena, they'd bring down their entire network. The meeting with Viktor Volkov was set for 8 p.m. at a warehouse on the docks that served as neutral territory. Dante arrived with Marco and a dozen of his best men, all armed, all ready for this to go sideways. Viktor was already there, a bear of a man in his 60s, with cold gray eyes and a reputation for brutality that had earned him fear across 3 continents. Beside him stood Alexei, the scarred nephew Elena had identified, and Charles Monroe himself. "Romano," Victor's voice was a gravelly rumble. "Thank you for meeting me. Didn't realize I had a choice," Dante replied, his tone cool. "Your men did shoot up my home. A warning, Victor said. A reminder that we want what belongs to us. The girl, she heard things she shouldn't have, saw things that make her a liability. You're a businessman, Dante. You understand the need to eliminate liabilities. I understand a lot of things, Dante replied. For instance, I understand that you've been running a human trafficking operation through Monroe's law firm. I understand that you've been bribing half the city government. I understand that if certain federal agencies received certain files, your entire operation would crumble within a week. Victor's expression darkened. You're threatening me? I'm offering you a deal. Dante pulled out a tablet, showing Victor a list of files ready to be transmitted. You leave Elena Martinez alone, permanently. You close down your operation at Monroe and Associates. And in exchange, this evidence disappears, and we go back to our respective territories with a renewed commitment to peace. Victor stared at the screen, his jaw working. You'd protect one insignificant girl at the cost of going to war with me? She's not insignificant to me, Dante said simply. And yes, I would. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension in the warehouse was thick enough to cut. Then Victor did something Dante didn't expect. He laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the metal walls. You've got balls. Romano, I'll give you that. He looked at Monroe, whose face had gone ashen. It seems your sloppy operation has cost me more than I'm willing to pay. He turned back to Dante. Fine, you have your deal. The girl lives. Monroe and Associates is no longer under our protection, and if I ever see either of them again, I'll consider our agreement void. He extended his hand. Dante took it, sealing the deal with a handshake that represented more than words ever could. As Victor and his men left, Monroe started to protest, but Alexei grabbed him by the arm, dragging him away. The lawyer's fate was sealed. Without the Volkov's protection, he'd be vulnerable to every enemy he'd made, every person he'd wronged. He wouldn't last a month. When Dante returned to the penthouse, he found Elena pacing the living room, worry etched across her features. She ran to him the moment he walked in. What happened? Are you okay? Did they agree? He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. It's over. You're safe. The Volkovs are standing down. Elena pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. How? What did you do? What I had to, he said simply. What I wanted to. Because you were right, Elena. You're not just someone I'm protecting anymore. You're someone I can't imagine my life without. She kissed him then, all the fear and relief and emotion of the past 2 weeks pouring into that kiss. Dante responded, pulling her closer, letting himself feel things he'd locked away for years. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elena smiled up at him. So what happens now? She asked. Do I still disappear? Take on a new identity and start over somewhere else? Dante cupped her face in his hands. That's up to you. I can still arrange all of that if it's what you want. Or, he paused, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with hope. Or you could stay, here, with me, build something new, something real, with the Mafia boss, she said, but she was smiling. That's quite an offer. I never claimed to be conventional, he replied, but I'm offering you my protection, my resources, and if you want it, my heart, such as it is. Elena pretended to consider it. Well, when you put it that way, how can a girl refuse? They spent the rest of the night talking, planning, dreaming about a future neither of them had expected to find. In the morning, Dante would have his lawyers draw up papers officially closing the case against Monroe and Associates, making sure Elena's testimony was on record, but protected. He'd also make arrangements to support her through law school, helping her achieve the dream of becoming a lawyer and fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, as he held Elena in his arms and watched the city lights flicker outside his window, Dante Romano allowed himself something he rarely did. He allowed himself to be happy, to believe that maybe, just maybe, lonely wasn't the only option after all. It had started at 3:17 in the morning, with a weeping girl in the rain, and a man who'd stopped his car despite every instinct telling him not to get involved. It had continued through danger and fear, through revelations and revenge, through moments of tenderness stolen between planning sessions and strategic moves. And now, as dawn broke over the city once again, it was transforming into something neither of them had dared to hope for. Something real, something lasting, something worth fighting for. Elena stirred in his arms, her green eyes opening to meet his. Morning already, she murmured. Morning, he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Sleep well. Better than I have in years, she admitted. Funny how being with a dangerous man makes me feel safer than I ever did before. Dante smiled. I think there's a psychology term for that. Stockholm Syndrome, Elena suggested with a laugh. I was going to say love, he replied, but we can go with your version if you prefer. She turned in his arms to face him fully. Love? That's a big word, Mr. Romano. It is, he agreed, but I think it fits. I think it's been fitting for a while now. I was just too stubborn or too scared to say it. Scared? You? Elena's eyes danced with amusement. The man who faces down Russian mob bosses and orchestrates complex criminal negotiations is scared of 3 little words? Terrified, he admitted, because saying them makes them real, makes you real, makes this real, and real things can be lost. Elena's expression softened. I'm not going anywhere, Dante. You saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me back my courage, helped me find justice for my father, showed me that not all power corrupts. She traced her fingers along his jaw. I love you too. It's terrifying and probably crazy, but it's true. They sealed it with a kiss, and this time there was no danger interrupting. No bullets or threats or midnight meetings. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to hold on. As weeks turned into months, they built a life together. Elena enrolled in law school, proving to be as brilliant in the classroom as she'd been at analyzing the evidence that had brought down Monroe and Associates. Dante continued to run his empire, but with a new perspective. Elena's presence in his life had reminded him that power was meaningless if you had no one to share it with. He started to shift his business interests, moving away from the purely criminal enterprises toward more legitimate operations. It was a slow process. You couldn't undo decades of a certain kind of business overnight. But with Elena's encouragement and insight, he began to see possibilities he'd never considered before. Mrs. Chen approved of the changes, both in Dante's business and in his personal life. She'd watched him isolate himself for years, build walls so high that no one could reach him. Seeing those walls come down, seeing him laugh and smile and live again, made her old heart happy. 6 months after that rainy night, Dante took Elena to the warehouse district where they'd had the meeting with Victor. It had been transformed. Using some of the money he'd redirected from his less savory enterprises, he'd created a community center, a place where at-risk youth could learn skills, get help with education, find opportunities that didn't involve crime. This is what you've done with the money, Elena asked, looking around at the state-of-the-art facility. This is what we've done, he corrected. You inspired it, made me see that breaking cycles of violence and poverty was more valuable than perpetuating them for profit. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. You're a good man, Dante Romano. I don't care what your reputation says. I know who you really are. A man trying to be worthy of you, he replied, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. A man who wants to spend the rest of his life proving that stopping the car that night was the best decision he ever made. Elena's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring, not ostentatious, but elegant and beautiful. A diamond surrounded by emeralds the exact color of her eyes. Marry me, Elena. Be my partner in all things. Help me build something better than what came before. Through her tears, she managed to say yes, launching herself into his arms with such enthusiasm that they both laughed. 1 year after 3:17 in the morning on a rainy street, Elena Martinez became Elena Romano. The wedding was small, intimate, with only their closest friends and family. Marco served as best man, Mrs. Chen cried happy tears, and even some of Dante's more reformed associates attended, pleased to see their boss finding happiness. During the reception, as they danced to a song about second chances and new beginnings, Elena whispered in Dante's ear, Do you ever think about that night? About what made you stop the car? All the time, he admitted. I've been trying to figure it out for a year. And have you? He pulled back to look at her. This incredible woman who'd turned his world upside down in the best possible way. Yeah, I think I have. I think somewhere deep down I knew that you were going to change everything, that you were worth the risk. Was I? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Worth the risk. Every single day, he replied, pulling her closer. Every single moment. As they swayed together, surrounded by people they loved, building a future they'd both fought for, Dante thought back to that rainy night, to the broken girl weeping against a wall, to the moment he'd made a choice that went against all his instincts and training. She'd whispered that there was no safe for her anymore, that she was beyond saving. But she'd been wrong. They'd both been wrong. Because sometimes safety wasn't about avoiding danger. It was about finding someone worth facing danger for, someone worth protecting, someone worth changing for. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of Dante and Elena's story. If you loved this tale of redemption and unexpected love, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. Your support means everything, and there are so many more amazing stories to come. Until next time, remember that sometimes the best things in life happen at the most unexpected moments. In the years that followed, the Romano name came to mean something different in the city. Still powerful, still respected, but also associated with community development, with opportunities for those who'd previously had none, with second chances. Elena eventually became a lawyer, specializing in helping victims of corporate crime and corruption. She used her experience with Monroe and Associates to build a practice that held powerful people accountable, that gave voice to those who'd been silenced. Dante supported her fully, using his connections and resources to help her cases, to protect her clients, to ensure that justice was more than just an ideal. Together, they were formidable. They had children, 2 daughters who inherited their mother's green eyes and their father's determination. Dante taught them to be strong, to stand up for what they believed in, to use power responsibly. Elena taught them compassion, justice, the importance of fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And every year, on the anniversary of that rainy night, they would return to the spot where Dante had found Elena. Sometimes they'd bring flowers, sometimes they'd just stand there, remembering. It became their tradition, their reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come, of how one moment, one choice, one act of unexpected kindness had changed 2 lives forever. Because that's what it had been, really, kindness. When Dante Romano had stopped his car at 3:17 in the morning, when he'd approached a weeping stranger in the rain, when he'd offered his hand and his protection, it hadn't been about strategy or leverage or advantage. It had been about seeing someone in pain and not being able to walk away, about recognizing, even in that brief moment, that some things were worth the risk, that some people were worth saving, that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary. Elena had whispered that there was no safe for her anymore, but Dante had shown her differently. He'd shown her that safe wasn't a place. It was a person. It was a choice. It was love, fierce enough to face down any danger. And in return, she'd shown him that power without purpose was just empty control, that an empire built on fear was a prison, that the real strength came not from inspiring terror, but from inspiring loyalty, respect, and yes, even love. They'd saved each other, really. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to build something beautiful from their jagged edges. As Dante held his wife close on another rainy night, safe and warm in the home they'd built together, listening to their daughters laughing in the next room, he thought about the man he'd been before that fateful night, cold, isolated, convinced that lonely was the price of power. How wrong he'd been, how grateful he was to have been wrong. Elena looked up at him, still able to read him after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" "Just that I'm the luckiest man alive," he replied, "and that I'd stop that car 1,000 times over if it meant finding you." She kissed him softly. "Good answer, Mr. Romano." As the rain fell outside, washing the city clean, Dante Romano counted his blessings, not his money, or his power, or his influence, but the woman in his arms, the children in the next room, the life they'd built from the ashes of who they'd been before. It had started at 3:17 in the morning with a girl crying in the rain and a man who'd almost driven past, a girl who'd whispered words of despair, words that had softened a heart he'd thought was beyond softening. There is no safe, not for me, not anymore. She'd been wrong, so beautifully, wonderfully wrong. And Dante Romano, the man who'd built an empire on being right, on always calculating the angles and making the smart play, had never been so happy to prove someone wrong in his entire life. The end